Hey guys, it's Brinda and Tom here. Look, I know we dropped an episode today already. Do check it out. It's a great conversation with Dr. Michael Ford. But because the killing of Charlie Kirk happened after we recorded that episode, we felt we wanted to address it and we wanted to discuss it on a special episode today. Our little show, we're not in any way on the map like Charlie Kirk's work is or was. I'll say is. But it occurred to me that we are engaged in a similar experiment where we are asking, can bringing people together who are diametrically opposed in politics, belief in institutions, maybe even their values and what they hold dear, is that a valuable, maybe even a subversive act in and of itself towards deeper understanding, maybe even an antidote to radicalization and further mistrust? Is this, in fact, one way in which our democracy is woefully lacking right now? So we wanted to bring together some good friends of the pod who we talk with regularly on the show to chat about it all. So let's just get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to the special episode of Why Should I Trust You? I'm Brinda Adhikari.
And I'm Tom Johnson.
And we're joined by three dear friends of the pod. You're all familiar with these folks by now. They've been on several times. First off is Elizabeth Frost, MAHA, Ohio. She also worked for the Kennedy campaign. How you doing, Elizabeth?
It's a very heavy day, but I'm just grateful to be in this little virtual room full of people who I think get the gravity of what we're all experiencing right now.
Yep, I hear you, and looking forward to digging into this with you guys. We've got Dr. Craig Spencer, who is an ER doctor. He is a professor at the Brown School of Public Health, or is it the Brown School of Medicine? You will tell me that in a second. He's a writer, and he also works for Doctors Without Borders. Hey, Craig.
Hey, similar to Elizabeth, I'm happy to be here, but also similarly unsettled. So I'm glad to have the space to have a conversation with y'all.
Here, here. And finally, we've got our buddy Aaron Everitt, who's a video journalist, a substacker for his own stack besides The Revolution. He also is a frequent he's also a frequent contributor to Jessica Reed Krause's House and Habit, and he is himself a Kennedy and a MAHA supporter. How you doing, Aaron?
Pretty much like everybody else. A tough couple of hours, or 24 hours, I would say.
Yeah. So look, let's just get right into it. I mean, first off, just kind of initial thoughts. Elizabeth, we've been texting a lot, and when you first heard the news, kind of what went through your mind?
Yeah, it was I think the first probably hour was just, oh my gosh, is this young man going to be okay? Because I think there's this weight and magnitude of adding, the loss of such a young life in with the brutality of the shots being fired in general. And so, I think I wasn't really able to process until, the news broke that unfortunately he was assassinated. And to me, when I think of Charlie Kirk, I've never really thought of his politics or his ideas, but rather what he's proven is possible in terms of political organizing, and that he has just been such a force and such a trailblazer, regardless of where your politics might lie. You could always borrow from the groundwork that Charlie Kirk had laid with Turning Point, and how we organize in this modern political space. And so to me, and as I was texting with so many of my friends last night, including friends in public health, and we were just talking about how much heartbreak, this nation has had in the past couple of weeks, between the CDC shooting and now this. And I think everyone is just feeling so incredibly wounded right now. And it really feels like there's an attack on activism in this country, and a threat. There feels as if there's this threat in the air, that speaking up has a higher cost than maybe we ever understood it to.
Yeah. And I want to also ask you and Aaron particularly because you had been texting me a little bit about Charlie Kirk's massive impact on the MAHA movement, which I don't think people really are aware of. Craig, I think in so many ways, the response to this, and I don't know if I like this or not, but it's like the response to who grieves and who grieves publicly and what they say is like this weird test that we're like giving ourselves as a society, particularly for people who before this attack happened may have found a lot of what Charlie used to say and engage in, like not just disagree with, but like really found it reprehensible in some ways. I'll just say it, and I know that but yet when you have something like this happen, I think it was this, like, people, like you said, felt really rattled. Does that describe you? Like, talk about what that, if you see yourself in what I'm saying.
Yeah, I was sitting with a student whose family is in Democratic politics, and it's a new student on campus here. And the student was saying, "Hey, look, like I'm having such a great time in my first week. I really love this. But, like, I want to make sure that I'm getting exposed to a bunch of different viewpoints." And I've like already noticed that a lot of my colleagues and peers think like me. They think the same thing about reproductive justice and a whole host of things. Like, how do I try to find different conversations and people I disagree with? And do you find benefit and value in that? And so I went on this long diatribe about this podcast and, how I talk to a bunch of people all the time that I don't agree with. But sometimes I do agree with them. And then, in the opening, you mentioned, we often think about two camps, whether it's MAHA and public health, whether it's MAGA and whatever, as diametrically opposed. But when we take ourselves off the social media bubbles and we talk to each other here on a podcast screen, it turns out that we're not necessarily diametrically opposed. There's a lot of overlap. And I hope that there's an incredible amount of overlap, regardless of whether you thought Charlie Kirk was, a prophet, or whether you thought he was reprehensible, that what happened yesterday is not okay. That should never be the answer. That all this does is further incite more violence like this. It drives us further apart. And the response in the immediate aftermath just made me so sick, because I had just spent time talking to a student about the value of these conversations, why we must find common ground now more than ever. And in the middle of this conversation, I pick up my phone to get a text from my dad who says, "Charlie Kirk's been shot and is presumed dead." And we can talk about this later. My dad and I and family and a lot of other folks have very different politics to me. We can talk very open and very honestly about that. And that's been helpful for me in this moment, but I feel like a lot of people don't have the opportunity to talk to people on the quote other side. What they're seeing is their side online. And what I'm seeing online on both sides is unfortunately just not acceptable.
Yeah, the response to the shooting, like I've had to actually take myself off of social media today because it's been pretty painful. On one hand, it's been interesting that there's actually been quite I'm like the people I follow, and it's funny, I think my algorithm thinks I'm both like this like super lefty, but also like a young white like 26-year-old man who's online a lot and who may be coded right. So I get like a really interesting like slew of accounts. I get it all. So I feel like I have a nice snapshot, Aaron, but it is hard to sometimes see the response. What's going through your mind?
Well, I just always have appreciated this young man's willingness to talk to people. And I think you have to take that at its best value. And people may not know him or have much take on him other than what the kind of caricature that is made of him. But he always told people, if you disagree with me, come to the front of the line. I want to talk to you. And I think that's just different than most people really even think about him. It's the snapshot and the social media stuff and the kind of caricature stuff. But if you ever listened to him for any length of time, he was willing to talk to anybody. And I think for myself, he's one of the primary reasons that I think any of the Kennedy stuff happened with Trump, because I think he was willing to sit down and talk to Kennedy before anybody else. Charlie wasn't very well liked within like Republican establishment world either. He wasn't a guy that people thought this is the future. I mean, they didn't like his populism. They didn't like his kind of just, to some degree, his sort of mimicking of the Trump bombast stuff. But honestly, he knew what he wanted to say. He knew who he was, and he was really confident in that. And I think that's something that's the hard part for me to really wrestle with is here's a guy that just went out to talk. I mean, he didn't tell people to come and he wasn't willing to like yell at them and do sort of some of the other sort of, social media nonsense that goes on with just the real confrontational Punch and Judy kind of nonsense. He was willing to have a conversation with anybody. So it's hard. I've got four young kids that are all like college age kids. And so to have these discussions about what's happening to our country and what is going on is, when my 18-year-old comes into my room last night at 10:30 and is just distraught to some degree and sort of sullen and says, Dad, what kind of country am I? What am I getting? Like I'm walking out into this world and this is the country I'm inheriting. What do we do? That's a hard thing to answer as a dad. It's really hard to answer as a country. And, I've gone back and forth between sort of tears and frustration and sadness, and certainly at the loss of someone and watching a man executed on live video stuff is like horrific. You can't ever unsee that stuff. But more than that, what it says about us as people, that anybody might celebrate that death, or that there would be people who say that the only thing that can come from this is vengeance. We're not going to answer that here. It's going to be in like conversations like this where there's a bunch of people you may not even agree with, but you just kind of come to love and like. And then it's way easier to have these conversations that you disagree about. There's a reason, that parliaments and congresses, and they're set up to be in the same room and they're supposed to talk with each other because it's way easier to do that face to face than it is just through memos or typing or some kind of X post or something like that. You're supposed to talk to each other. It's like what we're designed to be. It's who we are. It's inherent to us is to talk with one another and have these conversations and have hard conversations. When people don't talk is when things go really wrong. I mean, whether that's in a marriage or whether that's in friendships or whether that's in politics.
Boy, that's
Aaron,
such a
Aaron, can I just ask Aaron a question?
yeah.
If you don't mind sharing, what did you tell your 18-year-old son at 10:30 last night when he said, how do we move forward? What is this? I'm just curious the conversations that you're having because I imagine it's similar to the conversations I'm having with people in my family. And again, just to point out that, there isn't a divide here. I think that we all need to recognize and clearly note how unacceptable it is that this can't be the response. But I'm just curious, like my kids are much younger. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. I worry about what their future looks like in terms of their immediate ecosystems, what they're going to be exposed to. I worry about trying to have these conversations with them in a decade. Like, how did you manage something like this for, adult children who are clearly tuned in and maybe saw Charlie a model for how you get things done. I'd just love to hear if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't have a lot of great words. I just said that I felt like, part of why I got so engaged in the discussions that were happening over the last couple of years, which I wasn't engaged with before, but the reasons that I have gotten engaged with it were that I felt like better things could happen if we started talking. And instead of just being angry and frustrated with each other or sullen and saying that this is the end of the empire or the republic or whatever, getting really angry about all of that stuff, the conversation has to move to something where we say, look, I don't know how we're supposed to do this. I'm not really sure how we're supposed to do this sort of democratic wrestling match with each other, but we have to. And to try to walk out into that world and to do your best to do that with people you don't agree with. I think part of what I told him too is that some of this is intended to keep people even more silenced and to say that, if you're afraid of talking, that you won't talk. And that is just, man, that's like isolation is the worst thing that could ever happen to people. And, I don't know that I had a great answer, Craig, but it was kind of like what I had for him, which is that, you can't just, if you just wanted to be discouraged and crawl into a hole, then the end is really inevitable. But I feel like we have more duty than that.
Yeah, I would just chime in. I sort of had a similar experience to you guys of like, we are the adults now. Like there's, I don't know, the status of your parents. Both my parents have died. Like there's no older generation that's going to like step in and model this. Like it's us. So our kids are all living in social media. So they're living in the combat. And I too peeked at it last night and basically wanted to throw my phone out the window. I went from literally praying that Charlie Kirk lived to just feeling this profound sadness. Someone that I marginally tracked in my mind, probably my feeds, but just profound sadness that this happened. And we have to be the adults and say, first of all, in our own families to our kids, this is not who we are as people, as Americans, whatever level you want to take it to. That this is the wrong way to go, because they're getting a different message. They're just getting bombarded with the fight and the fight and the fight and the fight. So that was one thought. I think also on a sort of translating it into what we do and why, the five of us are on the Zoom right now. I came away from last night even more determined to have these conversations. And, we take some incoming. I think they resonate well with a lot of people. But we too take some incoming from all sides. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you platforming? Blah, 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 blah. We're like, well, what's the alternative? Everyone just goes off into their own little ecosystems and no one talks. Like, I'll respond and say, this worked. This conversation worked. We had people who walked away saying, Paul Offit, I don't think you're a monster. Or public health person, I don't think you're trying to kill me. Or, hey, MAHA person, like, I experienced that too with opioids in my family. I totally understand where you're coming from. I get it. I see you now. Like, I totally understand why you're motivated to do what you're doing. So I don't know. I just sort of woke up this morning thinking, like, we've got to do this, and it's never perfect and it's never great. And some conversations work better than others. And there's more aha moments. And sometimes people don't come really to listen, but we got to do it. And if you don't like it, okay, we'll try and quietly work around the side door to get you to come in and listen. But like, we've got to do it.
Yeah, Tom, I mean, you just said so many things that have just kind of set me thinking. But, when we started doing these conversations, so Elizabeth was like the first person. She was like, she's kind of our like ride or die on the show, because she was somebody that, like, when I started this conversation, when we got introduced to each other, it really started with the two of us being like, should we try this? And she was like, you're never going to be able to make it happen. I was like, I'm going to try it. And then we did it. And we never really thought about like how to do it or what the right parameters are or the goals, or it really was as simple as like, let's just fucking do it. And like, let's just see what happens. There really was no plan. I'm just being
Remember we
really
debated
honest
like
with you.
the first one, like, should we even post it? Like,
We weren't even sure. Remember, Craig?
Yeah.
we were like, is
We
that
were like-
violating the
we were
conversation
scared to
we just
post
had?
it.
We were scared to post it.
And
And
so
does that say something though about
It
like
really
where we
does.
are?
Yeah.
If you're terrified of what's happening. I mean, that's awful. It's awful to think about.
Yeah,
We
or that it
should-
was like so unique that we did this, that it was somehow violating this conversation that we just had by posting it. And then we're finally like, we got to share it, because again, we got to maybe model it, or at least let people hear it so we can spread it. I don't know. We just erred on the side of like, we got to just go for it. And everyone was like, yeah, go for it.
It,
I'm okay,
it
post
felt
it.
it felt fragile, I would say. It
Yes.
felt like we were holding this together with duct tape, and that if we let the world see it, they were going to rip the duct tape off and yank us back into our silos and beat us into submission, But
That's a really
not
good
what
way to put
happened.
it.
I also,
Yeah.
I think about that's a great point, Elizabeth. And I think about what you were just saying, Tom. You started by saying we're the adults now. And not only are we the adults, but think about all of us on this call. Like, remember September 11th. I remember every minute of where I was at.
Yeah,
And
100%.
Aaron, your boy wasn't there. And so your
No.
boy is learning about this now. I teach kids your son's age that I have to like contextualize this for them.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what September 11th would have felt like in this media ecosystem and in this environment, and what it would have been like. It wouldn't have been like what it was, and it was horrible. Um, but I can't imagine how people like your son are navigating this world right now, and it honestly scares me. But then I think about the fact of what you said, Tom. It's like we're the adults now, and we, as like accomplished adults that are all comfortable in what we're saying and what we're doing, a couple months ago felt like, oh my God, we had the secret conversation that maybe even we can't share. And so what does that reveal, not just about the broader media environment, but about our own engagement and what we feel comfortable and what we need to do? And I think what Charlie Kirk did, is that we've talked about this before, Brinda, like I disagreed with a lot of his platform. I disagreed with a lot of what he said. Um, but oh my God, he was unbelievably and incredibly successful at doing it, at saying, this is what I'm going to do, and setting out as a young person with energy and vigor and commitment to do it. And I wish that all the things that I'm passionate about, or the groups that I want to be doing, like had the same commitment, had the same vigor, had the same boldness and confidence to come out and say these things, even if people don't necessarily agree. Not everyone is going to agree. But what does it say about us being like, I don't know if we should be releasing this conversation? That was like wonderful and sweet and great, and then obviously set us up for further success. But maybe it's a moment for us to check as well, like what is our role in the media environment and what could we be doing better? I think it's this right now, standing up and saying, this is reprehensible, we can't have this, we can't be talking like this, we need to come and find common ground. But what are the other things that maybe we're overlooking?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Craig, that is reminding me of a point that Aaron just made specifically about how Charlie Kirk really wasn't that popular with sort of rank and file Republicans when he started, and maybe even through his entire trajectory. And I think, to me, that is a really important point, that we are in a moment where if what you're communicating is that the system and the current status quo is not representative of who you are or who your particular group, in his case, young people, people on campus, if that's not reflective, he basically kind of created a third party. And why Trump continually retweeted him and gave him a platform and invited him into his, close quarters with him, is because that's Trump. Trump is effectively, it's hard for me to even call Trump a Republican. I don't know what he is. Trump is Trump, right? And the way I kind of view that, I'd love for us to discuss that for a second, because one of the places I think, just kind of talking about the conversation between folks in kind of mainstream public health and MAHA and MAGA and whatever, is like, there's that like, sort of self-affiliation with institutions versus not institutions that seems to be at the root of a lot of the disagreement right now. And I even look at like the reaction to the MAHA report, and I thank all of you for responding and writing on the Substack. Do check it out, listeners. We have a Substack with all these guys and the responses. But part of it I often find is, one group views the system potentially as being a tool to help and create those changes that we're looking for in our society, and that you can't do it without that system. And then the other group is like, the system is the problem, and we have to reject these parts of the system. And sometimes I hope you see that we're trying to bring that general theme out in a lot of our conversations. But I wonder, Aaron, like, does that feel right, the way I'm describing that kind of, that sort of central tension? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think that's the heart of this whole thing, is that, systems ultimately require people to sort of live within an orthodoxy within the system, right? And you have to have the right words, you have to say the right things, you have to do the right things, because that's how the system functions. And that battle is that's a struggle for people that this isn't working for. This, when you're actually out in the real world and you're struggling with opioid addiction or obesity or health issues, or even bigger stuff than that, where you can't, you're like almost 60% of Americans don't have $1,000 in their checking account. That's crazy. That means that there's something really broken. And I think when you feel like you have been extracted or extracted from, and you have this sense that the things that you do are just truly about generating these big things like GDP and 401k, portfolio expansions, and you're just one more cog in this machine, that's where this tension comes, because the people in the machine that are trying to do the things, and I give them all the credit in the world, because the machine is the machine, so you got to try to make it work. But when you're in it, you start to narrow down what the inputs can be, because if you don't, then it gets too broad and too weird and too wild to manage. And there is a sense that like the system has to manage this. It has to manage the conflicts. It has to manage the stuff that we're doing. And when we have that happen, then that's where the tension comes, because for the people that it isn't working for, they're going, but wait a second, I need you to listen to me. That's one of the things I think Kirk was really good at. Like, he understood the student and the student ethos of what they're walking into more than anybody. I mean, when he was on Tucker Carlson a month ago, maybe, or something like that, and I listened to that. It was a fabulous episode. And he says, do you know what BNPL is? And Tucker says, I don't have any idea what that is. That's buy now, pay later. And he talks to him about how kids are putting pizzas on credit. This is the world our children are walking into. And so that struggle is what I think Charlie was really tapping into. And you saw it in the politics. You saw it swing. You saw things move to the other direction, because they're saying, look, I want to still try to work within the system, but the system is broken. So we need somebody to either come in and make a mess of it so that it can be reassembled and rethought about in a new and better light, or like maybe we have to just try the whole thing and do it a different way. And I admire that, because I think it's actually the only way to get through it. Like, if we just keep going back at this and saying, well, we just have to keep refining the inputs, trying to keep making it tighter and tighter, which is what so many of us in the medical freedom world have kind of bristled about over the last 5 years. It's just the inputs have to keep getting smaller and smaller and more constrained and more mandates and more things like that. And you just go, but you guys, you're not listening. You're not listening that one size doesn't fit all. But that's what a system really requires. So I totally resonate with that.
Yeah. Craig, I wonder if you can weigh in, because, let me just bring it down to real brass tacks, right? Like, when it comes to just making a society function, where, as individuals, if you have a certain amount of money, you can, avoid any sort of government assistance. You can, continue on with your life and buy your groceries and go on your vacations and whatever. But if you don't have that, or if you're just in general, you're sick and you might be, an opportunity to be in a clinical trial, or you are dependent on your state and local resources for some sort of, further assistance, like, are we saying as a society that we have to just kind of put the TNT stick of dynamite in all of it and blow everything up because none of it is working? Or are we able to sort of kind of look at, because I'll tell you, it's very resonant. That message is very resonant, that we got to like blow up the system. I come from, a background in corporate media, and there's a part of me that, like, for me, that was my sort of radicalization, if there was one, where I kind of saw inside the corporate media beast, and there was so much in it that just didn't work for me. But I'm not sure I would say that we need to, well, I don't know, maybe I would. Maybe media isn't the right example, but Craig, do you see what I'm saying? Help me make me sound better than I'm sounding, which is like, is there a world in which we can still hang on to this, like, blow up the status quo message, which is deeply resonant in this country, but without hurting ourselves in the process? Like, is that possible?
Yeah, everything that I've heard so far, about Charlie's impact, and about, him being young and being able to resonate with a different group of people that were his community, or he could talk to, I think is important, because if you look at politics over the last 8 years, 10 years, basically, the whole kind of conscious life of, tween teen for your kids, Aaron, like, I can't imagine what this political environment has looked like for them. Politics has been broken. Right, it's been broken. I just finished reading the biography of Reagan by Max Boot. If you haven't read it, it's absolutely incredible. And the way that politics is talked about and bipartisan things that happen, like, I can't imagine what it's like for a kid right now to try to experience and understand politics. It's broken, and so I could see why Charlie Kirk would resonate. when it comes to things like public health and medicine and, working in a hospital like what I do, I have similar worries about the system. I think the system is broken. I wrote over a year ago, I think before MAHA even existed, in the LA Times about like basically a MAHA screed of like food is bad and healthcare is too expensive and we don't have access to it, like all these other things.
Craig was MAHA before MAHA.
Yeah, look, also to the point of like so many of these things are overlapping concerns, even if we have, fundamental disagreements on some other big things. And so I see space for like blowing up part of the system. I think that like public health and medicine needs to dramatically change in this country. I think politics needs to dramatically change in this country. But from being inside the system, particularly on both of these things, on medicine and public health, I worry what happens when we put TNT in the middle of it. I worry that all of the folks that, are doing the work on FDA trials for new cancer therapies for kids, like one was just announced yesterday, like that doesn't happen or it gets delayed. I worry about people not getting their SNAP benefits, and I think it's like a great idea to have MAHA boxes with like healthy food more accessible to people, but like 40 million folks are going to lose access to some of their SNAP benefits in the next couple years. And so I understand that from the outside, it makes so much sense for us just to blow it up, take the pieces and put them all back together. I think that there does need to be work on politics, on public health. But I worry that once we do that at the core of those institutions, we're going to spend a long time trying to pick up those pieces and finding out that maybe eventually they don't fit back together. We need completely new pieces and we don't have the people or the resources to do that. That's my worry. That's my worry with politics right now, is that instead of this being a moment where we have some, nice little platitudes and we have cooler heads and they prevail and we move forward, we have people online actively stoking anger and calling for prosecutions and trials and shutdown of leftist organizations, despite the fact we don't even know anything about who is responsible for this heinous crime. And I don't want to make the same comparison with the discussions around public health and around medicine. But I would like for us to say, hey, where is the common ground? What are the things that we can work on together? This is what we do here. This is what you've been doing for months. And move forward on that, recognizing that there are big parts of the system that we can change. But if we try to fundamentally undermine the middle of it, I'm concerned the whole structure is going to fall and we're all going to be hurt.
One thing I've learned from these conversations is that public health people that came to public health through emergency room medicine are badasses. Like they're kind of
Yes.
radical, like they're kind of revolutionary because they've been there in the middle of the night, on a 14-hour shift when all of the failure of medicine in America comes like rumbling through the door on a gurney. Like they see it, they lived it, and they're patching it. And then they come out like Craig and they say, all right, we got to do better. We've got to change this. I'm going to be this change agent. And there's a lot in that I see then talking to folks from MAHA. I'm like, you guys are both like kind of radical. And I wish that public health would say, guys, like I'm with you, but like learn from the mistakes we've made, learn from the hurdles we've had to go around. Like we have a lot of institutional knowledge that could like turbocharge the parts of MAHA that we think like really could make a difference. Like we're aligned with you on these things. Like don't flush us out and have to come into the building and turn the lights on and figure out like where the bathroom is. Like we've been doing this. We are with you in spirit. But we've had to navigate a lot of stuff that we could share with you and we could all do this together. A little utopian, I get it, but like there's something there, and just to say we're public health, no, MAHA bad. You guys don't realize this will never happen. How are you going to fund it? Stop. This is bad. That doesn't get us there. It's a different message that I wish was being shared, which is like, I'm with you. Look what I learned. I've got notes. Like we can fix this. Anyway.
Yeah, Tom, it's such a terrific point because I feel like, and Elizabeth, I want to bring you into this, which is, I find that there's these, we've created these very sort of deliberate boundaries so that we don't interact with each other, right? So for the public health side, they really have a problem with MAHA's stance, particularly on vaccines. It's like a no-fly zone for them. And I think because they mistrust Kennedy so much, it is also another boundary that they're like, well, as long as Kennedy's your guy, I don't know that I can really be with you. On the MAHA side, what I'm observing, and Aaron and Elizabeth, I want you to chime in, but I think they view this system as a deeply captured system that has been sort of perpetuated by corporate influence, just way too cozy with industry, not questioning enough about, corporate financing of studies and things like that. And I look at the fact that they have continuously brought up that we have still really poor health metrics in our society. And how can we continue a system that continues to have such poor health metrics? But the Kennedy of it all, I think, is a major chasm between these two groups. Sometimes I wish there were I know y'all love him a lot, but I sometimes wish we could like there were no leaders and it was just us, that like talking through it, because I feel like we have these really sort of like these landmines, and I don't know what to do about those. I really don't. You know what I'm saying? Elizabeth.
Yeah, so I definitely resonate a lot with what you're saying, that sometimes this idea of having a leader or a kingpin of a movement can so if sometimes with people have like a personal issue or they take issue with one very specific stance of a leader in a movement, then it almost discredits the entire argument of the movement to people who maybe haven't heard it from the inside. And so I very much resonate with that. I mean, on a personal level, I've got a lot of love for Bobby Kennedy. And I've really seen, his ethos and his conscience and his morals in action, and watched him have his hand put to the fire, and kind of watch how those decisions were made. So, I'm confident in his heart, but when we're in a time and we're having a conversation about a leader of, of next door neighbor political movement being assassinated, I think as I'm listening to all of this, my mind just goes like, we have to, as people, give others the benefit of the doubt that they're not evil and they're not doing these things that we disagree with because of some malicious intent. And I'm speaking to MAHA too. I'm very much speaking to my own tribe when I say that, is that if we are to ever get through this gridlock of conversation, this, as Craig said it, I very much agree. It's a manufactured divide. It's in our heads. We all probably agree. Most people probably agree on most things. And, we find that when we're in conversations with people and we take our titles off and we take our hats off, and we find that most people agree on most things. The how and how we get there is a big part of the question. But most people want our kids to be healthy. They want people to have opportunity. They want people to have choices. And so, to that end, I don't think that our country is nearly as divided as we think. But if we start demonizing leaders of movements versus listening to what the grievances of the people supporting that person are, then I think that's how we end up in having conversations like we're having today. And in terms of this idea of blowing up systems, I think that's another thing. Most people agree that we probably need to, mix this up a little bit to, try again and figure out if there's another combination. There's another secret sauce that works better to accomplish, what we want, a safe, healthy country full of opportunities. But then it comes down to the what and how. What are you blowing up and how are you doing it? And the analogy that comes in my mind is, are we blowing things up like a target in a war zone where we get to speed off in the middle of the night and leave someone else to pick up the pieces? Or are we blowing this up like a controlled demolition in the middle of a populated city where we actually have to worry about where the pieces fall and who might get hit along the way? And so I don't think the question is, do we blow things up? It's how do we do it and how do we do it responsibly?
Ooh, I put a heart emoji that I don't think our listeners can see, but I do think that's so smart, And Aaron, I wonder if you want to weigh in on that specifically, on the point of view of the leadership part of it. Can I also just say one thing that I think is happening? I think the public health folks are going to freaking rip me a new one for saying this, but I'm just going to say it. I think amongst a lot of folks in public health and amongst Democrats, there's a little bit of an envy right now that y'all have leadership and we don't. Like, you have Donald Trump and you have Bobby Kennedy. And yes, there are people out there who, in my tribe who don't like them, and they think they're dangerous and whatever. But I think some of this boils down to the fact that I don't know that there's a leader in public health at the moment, that there's even a movement, that I think some of it, it's hard to argue that you're not the status quo when there doesn't feel like there's an insurgent type movement that you're a member of, right? And so I wonder about that that sometimes leadership is just reflective of the fact that there's a groundswell to do something and that you have a figurehead attached to it, but that's not really the point. They're more a symptom of the fact that there's a bigger force at play, Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, leaders have like come and gone always, and people have clamored for leaders from the beginning of time. You can go all the way back through old Hebrew scriptures and find out that, even though they were instructed not to, they kept clamoring for a king. That's normal. I mean, I think that's humanity's sort of bend towards those things, and I think there's good lessons in that. And that look, leaders are going to be controversial. They're going to be people, no matter who it is, that stands up and says, "I'm going to step in here and do this." Somebody's going to say, I don't want that guy to be the guy. I don't like that guy, or I don't want that person or that woman to do this or whatever. And I think that's a challenge. I think, to your point, yeah, maybe there is something to the idea that these two guys kind of have at least moved the needle in a direction that I think most of the people that are on the other side of the aisle didn't think was ever going to happen. I think they looked at it and said, no, we're kind of in this direction, in a progressive direction, and we're moving in the way we want to go. And then you see this kind of reaction to it. But to Elizabeth's point, the reality is that for so many people, they just look at this and go, gosh, I just don't know. Like, I don't know if this is working. I just don't think this is working. And so then they are asking for something different and asking for something better. And when someone like Kennedy or Trump steps in and says, well, I can help us get there, of course, there are going to be people that are going to listen to that and are going to be people who say, yeah, I'll sign me up. I'll be in your force to get it done, kind of thing. And I think that's okay. I think that's like part of politics. I think it's part of how we have to kind of move forward in things. And, to kind of talk about, to some degree, what Craig was saying about, well, look, there are institutional things and there's things inside of here we don't really want to just lose. I think that's really an important piece. And I don't think anybody, like, not at least from my side from my perspective on things, is going, gosh, burn it all down and let's go back to witch doctory or something like that. I don't think that's what's being said. But I think when you go and confront these systems as a user, you go, this is just terrible. I don't like the insurance system. I don't like how I'm processed through here. I don't like that I get 5 minutes with my doctor. I don't like any of this. And that's true in politics, tremendously true in politics. You have, if you do the math, there's 500 and whatever representatives and senators in Washington. That means that we're representing such a small voice. We're not giving people the voice to be able to go out and say, like, this is my grievance and I need your help. And that's where you live in this illusionary world that people feel like, okay, well, I have this vote and I can do these things and that's how I'm going to get my voice exercised. But but it never works. Like it goes up there and people just kind of get lost in the system. And then it's always kind of, well, we have to make sure that it always is managed by the State Department or whatever else, right? It's just, so it never really comes back and translates to the people that the things that they're in grievance over are being addressed. And that's a hallmark of a failed government to some degree and failed politics. And there's got to be better questions about how we solve that problem. It's one of those things that I think is so important about what Kirk was doing and what others do too. It's not just Charlie, but particularly in this instance, this is the most dramatic and awful thing that I've remember as an assassination. The life is lost, a father of 2 young kids, a husband, and it's in a public setting, in a very public setting where there's thousands of cameras rolling, awful shots of things that people had as close-ups. This is going to be kind of haunting our conversation around discussion for so long. But if we don't do that, then we really will never feel represented, because it isn't going to matter if I vote for whoever from District 4 in Colorado. Are they really, I may never even have a chance to talk to them. I may never even see them. I may never even know who they are, frankly, because other than they're on my ballot. That's not that's not being represented at all. And you lose so much if you're not in that conversation. If you just feel like, well, this is just kind of this is what it is. And now the guy that actually wants to go out and talk to people is shot. So this is, I don't want to do any of this. And I think it's really imperative to go to the other side of that and say, we're not doing that. I don't want to do this. And really, I think that is the difference. You talked about the kind of doctors that come from ER and how they have this sort of sense of radicalism. And I would way prefer to have Hawkeye from MASH over Terry from Soul, who's managing all the file cabinets. I would prefer that. And I think that's what most doctors want too. And I think that's what most people in politics want too. They don't want this kind of like managerial running through the filing cabinets and wondering where the one little jot or tittle is missed. They want something that is actually going to impact them in their real lives.
Boy, do I love the MASH references there. And I'll just say that, one other thing that I've just in all the Charlie Kirk kind of remembrances out there, somebody quoted, I know I'm gonna get this wrong, but something to the effect of like, part of the reason he engages in these conversations is to actually prevent a revolution in the country, and is actually to attempt to engage in a sort of a de-radicalization, which I think is interesting. And I'll just put this one point out there, and then Craig, I'd love to go to you specifically on that point from a few minutes ago about leadership. But, our current media environment really incentivizes sensationalism and conflict. And I will say, as somebody who first would only watch clips of, say, Charlie Kirk or Alex Jones or Ben Shapiro or Megyn Kelly, some of the stuff, especially, as y'all know, I've voted Democrat. I'm kind of coded liberal in some ways, although I don't know anything about who I am anymore. I'm having an identity crisis. But anyway, all that to say that, like, I would watch that stuff, and it would be upsetting. It would get like a rise out of me, and I could see myself being in the world of like, well, this feels like it's incendiary. It feels like it could incite somebody. And then what I did, particularly as Tom and I and our team was developing the show, is that I started to really watch the whole conversation, like not the clips, but like the whole whatever hour long. And boy, those were really different. Like, they weren't just like the hostile back and forths. They weren't just the like, and look, even some of those longer clips, the longer conversations could get difficult at times. But I didn't leave it feeling like it was like on a whole, like this bomb that had just been lobbed, right? And I do wonder, like the like clip, I know it sounds so like juvenile or innocent by just saying clips are harmful, but can you imagine if all I did was put out clips of what we did on this podcast? Aside from the fact that I don't really know how to, I don't do it because I'd rather just the whole conversation live on its own. And so I do feel like the clip strategy is something that's really turning us into like different versions of ourselves, like these like weird mutants that we become this like like people think we're a whole version of like this one thing we said that taken out of context is like really heavy and like incendiary. Craig, I just put that out there.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I know that people are leaning into longer conversations so that we can get into this nuance and we can have people that disagree on fundamental things find common ground. I do want to know that things that are said in those clips are real. And specifically for some things that Charlie Kirk himself has said, and I don't want to whitewash this, some things have been bigoted and some things have been incendiary. And I have friends in my life, including folks in the trans community, that feel like things that he said has dramatically impacted their own well-being and their own concerns and their own safety. And so, yes, I agree we should listen to these things in the larger context. And when we do that, maybe there is more context that changes the meaning. The clipping is problematic. What we saw immediately after the assassination yesterday was immediate clips of things that Charlie Kirk has said in the past. I saw people talking about the fact that just months ago he mentioned that the price of keeping the Second Amendment in this country is going to mean some people need to die. A whole host of things that were meant to almost justify his assassination in a way, to win these points, to get clicks, to get retweets, to get likes. That's disgusting. Even if you fundamentally disagree with parts or even the whole context, listen to the whole hour and I might disagree with, I don't know. But this all goes back to your initial question of leadership and what Charlie Kirk was able to do, what Donald Trump is able to do, and what RFK Jr. are able to do. They're able to do exactly that, push an agenda to be really strong leaders. Leaders that I don't particularly agree a lot with, but do I envy their ability to lead? Do I envy their ability to make change and to get people excited and activated and engaged? Yeah, I really do. But I also want us to be thoughtful because so much of our conversation, I think, around public health and politics as well, is informed by COVID, even if we don't talk about COVID. I don't want us to conflate the need for new leadership as the conflation of status quo with stasis. This idea that public health wasn't doing anything, that we didn't care about food, that we didn't care about all these things. Like the overwhelming majority of the things that Elizabeth, you care about, I care about. I also have kids. I want them to eat healthy food. For like most of the pandemic, railed against pharmaceutical companies and inequitable access to vaccines globally. I've been concerned about corporate capture, all these other things. I want a leader that can push a lot of the same things. My concern, obviously, is that there are other things that I don't think are okay. I'm concerned about some of the initiatives that are being pushed that I think will limit access to vaccines in 6 to 12 months, things that I think do save lives, things that I've seen save lives, not just here in the US and internationally. And so you're right, Brinda, I do want that leadership. I wish that in public health and honestly in politics, we had bolder, stronger, more morally upstanding leaders that were capable of making these changes that we need. We don't necessarily have them in all aspects of the life that we need right now. And I think a lot of that is particularly driven by what gets clicks, what gets likes, what gets interactions. And unfortunately, it's not always conversations just like the one we're having.
Yeah. And on that note, I just, Elizabeth, I want to give you the last word because I know that we're losing you in a little bit, but I think that this was just a beautiful conversation. I'm just so honored to be able to have it with y'all. Elizabeth, any final
Wait, Brinda,
thoughts?
can I make a penultimate
Oh,
thought
penultimate
before Elizabeth
thought
dives in?
from my buddy Tom Johnson. Go ahead.
Very brief.
Word of the day.
Word of the day. We do have leaders. Both sides have leaders, right? Unfortunately, those leaders are the algorithms, right? So that's what's leading us right now. You could say Trump, you could say Kennedy, you could say Gavin Newsom, you could say Josh Shapiro. But it's the stronger leading force in our lives are the algorithms. And that speaks to your clips. That speaks to, a lot of what informs what we think these days and what inspires us or what pisses us off. And all of that is skewed towards the fight. So the more that we can get out of that river and actually talk to each other, I think it's maybe not our only hope, but like it's up there, like as really one of the ways that we can break out of that system, because it's just a heavy pull that's taking us to a dark place, and we have to sort of get out of that stream and get more people out of that stream.
Yes, like 100,000% yes. I think that is something that Tom and I, for us doing this podcast, is really an effort to say, no, we're not going to let you trap us into an echo chamber.
Yeah.
We know that you want to, whoever the you is out there. You know, you figured out how I vote, you figured out what issues I like, you figured out who my friends are, and so you're only going to feed me a certain kind of content, which then is going to create me into a human that can only handle looking at that kind of content. And if I'm then given any other kind of content, I sort of don't know how to handle it. And it creates this tribalism that, quite frankly, for us, you know, look, the easiest thing in the world, you guys, would have been us doing a show where we just interview people from public health and we ask them to tell us about how much they like are worried about Kennedy and what he's going to do to the health infrastructure, like talk about, you know, how vaccines don't cause autism, talk about like that could have been a show. We could have done that show. But we decided to do a very different kind of show. And mainly we wanted to make it structurally different, which is how can we do a show that actually reaches across our coded echo chamber into other coded echo chambers? Because you're all in echo chambers. We're all in echo chambers. But like, is there a way that we can like cross-pollinate echo chambers and figure out a way that we can bring each other's followers in to kind of a new room, right? Like a new space where it doesn't mean we're agreeing any more than we were before we got into that space, but we're sort of like, hey, who are you? I've never seen you before. Or who are you? And oh, I'm actually hearing from you, as opposed to reading the New York Post and reading or watching Alex Jones. And oh, I'm hearing from you, as opposed to looking at the Atlantic or the New York Times. Like, I'm hearing and facing you. And I don't know. I just wanted to put out there that that was our intention. Elizabeth, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think with what you and Tom were both saying, you're scratching at something that I think is so fundamental in the experience this country's going through after Charlie's assassination, which is this technology component. And Craig, I believe you even touched on this a bit with 9/11. If technology and internet and virality had the same influence in 2001 or in 1963 or in 1968, I can't imagine what the experience would be. You know, if I'm not mistaken, it was, you know, several years before the Fools of Pruder film was actually shown by Geraldo Rivera.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
It was quite some time.
10 some
And
years.
yeah. And so to think that, you know, Brinda, when we were texting about this yesterday and we didn't know if he was okay or not, and you open up X and you just see a video that I'm not going to describe, and I hope no one ever has to watch that video. But to see that happening in basically real time, I mean, it felt like the most dystopian thing. And I'm a part of a generation, you know, the millennial generation, where we kind of had the first half of our life without this, and then the second half of our life with it. And, you know, maybe we were texting our friends in high school, but we certainly, you know, weren't anywhere near where we are today, in terms of the, you know, instantaneous communication and dissemination of information. And so I think this is something that we're probably only going to understand how this impacted our country once we've processed it. I just think this is so very new. And I guess my parting thought would be, regardless of how you feel about Charlie Kirk's politics or his religious views or any other ideologies, I think most of us can say that we would all want our children to grow up to be as successful and impactful in what they do and what they love and what they're passionate about as Charlie was. And, I'm about the same age as Charlie. We work in the same field, grassroots organizing, political activism, and there are probably, definitely areas that I could think of where Charlie and I are probably we're very much at odds ideologically. But in the sense of what he was able to accomplish and what he was able to prove is possible, he's proving that to Democrat children just the same as he was conservative children. And I've said a lot. I think one of the great paradoxes of Charlie Kirk is that whether you loved him or you hated him, he probably motivated you to go vote. He probably made you feel like it was important to go vote. And that's healthy for a democracy. And so I hope that when people look back on his legacy, what they see is less about his beliefs and more about what he's proven is possible for people of all beliefs and all ideologies. And all the kids out there that might be listening, or all the parents with kids out there that might be listening, we can all accomplish big things, and we just have to be brave. And I hate to say it, but to some extent, we have to be willing to meet the same fate in this world. And it's a really hard thing to process. But through conversations like this, I think we are, able to heal, even if 1% at a time.
Yeah, and I just say that to echo what Tom was saying in the beginning, that in the last 24 hours, I think I've just felt even more motivated and emboldened to do the kind of work that we're doing. It's a very specific space, the like engagement space, to be in like that engagement with people who disagree with you space. It's really difficult. When we have these conversations, they're exhausting for everybody involved. I know sometimes I'm like sweating through them. I have to have lots of water. I also sweat easily, but that's a different thing. But I think that, it's the only thing I know how to do right now, guys, like truly. The only thing I know how to do is to speak with people who not only, like to Elizabeth's point, not only is it's not just because we disagree. It's actually, I think you guys all have really interesting skills that are really important for this moment. And I said this on the live stream, on a MAHA live stream, that I don't think MAHA can do this alone right now, like this plan that it has. And I think it needs folks in public health, like some really smart people I know who are really aligned with them on fighting chronic disease, on figuring out toxic exposures, on really rooting out like corporate capture in parts of our government and our medical research. And like, if only we could sort of get to a place where we could realize that, like, part of our show is helping you guys realize that you each have these kind of like, not to get, the talk of economics, but like you each have comparative advantages. and, I don't know, I could ramble on forever, but all of that to say that like, I am just so grateful to be doing this conversation with you guys. You are, you've been on our show so many times. The reason we keep coming back to you is because, we really love your thoughts. We love getting to know you. We don't like being extractive and just going to one person and then being like, peace. You make us better, and we learn from you. And we hope that these experiences are meaningful for you guys as well. So I just want to thank you so much. I think Elizabeth may have had to hop off. She had a thing to do. Aaron and Craig, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Anytime. You know that.
Hey, thanks for making space.
All right. Well, I'm Brinda Adhikari. He is Tom Johnson. Do check out, I know we're putting a lot of content out for you today, but we do hope that you take a second just to listen to it whenever you want. No rush. And we'll be right back here next week. We got some pretty good stuff lined up for you guys. So thank you so much. Have a peaceful rest of your weekend.